Let me take you back in time, to a place where platformers dominated the gaming market and dozens of companies were competing with their very own platforming mascots. Whether that was Mario, Crash, Sonic, or the topic of this video today, Spyro the Dragon. I don't mean to play the nostalgia card here, but as a kid I adored the first 3 Spyro games. See, every day before school I would have to go over to my friend's house to wait for the bus, but since I got there 2 hours early, we would sit down and just play his PlayStation. I was mostly a Nintendo nerd as a kid, only owning the GameCube and Game Boy for many years, so I have to admit, it was a horizon-expanding experience to play a game that wasn't on a Nintendo system. It was here that I was introduced to Crash Bandicoot, and once again, Spyro the Dragon. There was something about Spyro that fascinated me as a child, and now that I'm older, I realized that it was basically because he was a flying, talking purple dragon. Plus, his gameplay was unlike anything I had ever seen at the time. The original trilogy of Spyro games were great then, and still hold up today. The concept of running around, burning enemies to a crisp, and headbutting others still delivers an entertaining experience. Not to mention the satisfaction of breaking chests and finding a variety of gems in the overworld. Even to this day, I find just exploring the open world of the 3 original games to be quite enjoyable. And I'm not the only one who thought these games were spectacular. All 3 titles were met with critical acclaim, and it seemed like Sony had finally been successful in their new platforming endeavors. Spyro was shaping up to be a great mascot for Sony next to Crash Bandicoot, but then something terrible happened. Something that would forever taint the series. So if you weren't already aware, a team of developers called Insomniac Games were the ones behind the first 3 Spyro games. Then they sort of shifted focus away from Spyro to start the Ratchet and Clank series. Insomniac felt like they couldn't do anything more with their reputation-building purple reptile, since he couldn't equip weapons to his hand, so they turned their attention to new projects. See, another company, Universal Interactive, actually owned the rights to the Spyro franchise, meaning they could choose whatever developer they wanted to produce a new Spyro game. Because Insomniac wasn't too fond of having this middleman in the equation of making games, they gave up their first intellectual property and left to work on other games. A similar thing happened with Naughty Dog with Crash Bandicoot, but that's a topic for another day. This marked a huge change for the Spyro series. Now, the rest of the Spyro games that would follow would be tackled by multiple different developers. You could say right here, this switch in development teams is really what caused Spyro to, well, spiral down. Get it? It's no surprise that we haven't had a mainstream Spyro game for 7 years. Given just how many times Spyro switched development hands, you can imagine that didn't mean much good for Spyro's reputation. So after Insomniac left the Spyro series, a plethora of Spyro games began to emerge, releasing year after year after year. Most of these were surprisingly handheld games, and those handheld games were received decently well by the general public. They were nothing special or memorable, just average or good handheld Spyro games. However, it would be a huge understatement if I said the next 2 console Spyro games were received poorly. They were met with anger and extreme disappointment. Let me set the stage for you here. Fans of the Spyro series, which included me at the time, were eagerly awaiting a new Spyro title, one that could live up to the greatness of the last game in the original trilogy, Year of the Dragon. And when Enter the Dragonfly came out in 2002, it was met with overwhelming negativity. Everything about the game just screamed mediocrity. The cutscenes, the models, the tedious gem collecting, the frame rate, everything. And it certainly didn't help that it was a broken, glitchy mess. It felt unpolished and rushed. I'm just summing up some points here, but needless to say, most fans of the original series were disappointed. Enter the Dragonfly single-handedly ruined the series' reputation. The backlash it received was enough to tarnish the series forever. To further rub salt on the wound, the next title, A Hero's Tale, was met with yet more backlash. The game was still better, but it was still mediocre. Personally, I don't find the game to be that bad. I mean, there were some really stupid design choices, but it was still tolerable. Still, the community was already disappointed by Enter the Dragonfly and had their hopes high that the next game could deliver an experience up to snuff with the series' previous quality standards. standard. What Spyro fans got certainly did not fit the bill. And while we're on the topic of Enter the Dragonfly, what kind of name is that? It sounds so ridiculously silly that I can't say it with a straight face. Seriously, look in the mirror and just say Enter the Dragonfly. You'll either laugh or cry tears of sorrow. If you truly want to see just how taxing of an experience Enter the Dragonfly is, check out my good friend Exoparadigm Gamer's playthrough of the game over on Game Mavericks. The game is such an atrocity that it has to be seen to be believed. Oh, and don't worry, I still haven't forgotten about you, Spyro A Hero's Tale. You were sure a tale of bad game design, a terrible plot, an unsatisfying 100% reward, and huge difficulty spikes. These titles were what set Spyro off in the wrong direction. Sure, Insomniac leaving spelled doom for the series, but that was just an assumed doom. There's a difference. See, we could have gotten a team of developers that could have produced a great game that might have even rivaled the originals and perhaps trumped them all. Now, I know I'm praising the originals a lot, but they certainly have their flaws. Flaws that I don't feel like explaining now. Anyways, it seemed like the Spyro series had finally been eradicated, what with the atrocities that were Enter the Dragonfly and A Hero's Tale. But in truth, the shitfest had only just begun. Sierra, the new owners of the Spyro name, kept pumping Spyro titles out, creating a new series title to fit a new series of games with a new gameplay style. The Legend of Spyro. Totally makes the game different, right? I imagine this was sort of a way to reboot the franchise since fans were already dismayed by the decreasing quality of Spyro games. It makes sense on both a marketing and psychological standpoint. By adding just a couple of words, they were able to make people hope this new series wouldn't be as mediocre as the last two console Spyro games. But before we dive into those games, I want to discuss another thing that perhaps led the Spyro series down the inevitable toilet. This is something a lot of games suffer and actually benefit from. I noticed that every year, from 1998 until 2008, a new Spyro game was released, whether that be a handheld or console game. So that's 10 years of non-stop game releases, much like a similar franchise I can't stand today. Looking at you, Pokemon! Call of Duty. Unlike the Call of Duty series though, the Spyro games got progressively worse. Yes, as much as it pains me to say this, the Call of Duty games are actually decent, if not good. They retain a lot of similar things, and I do mean a lot of similar things, throughout the series, but they do those things really well. Spyro, on the other hand, well, it just did not. Look at Enter the Dragonfly, the next console game after the third Spyro game. At least Call of Duty games aren't broken, glitchy messes. Nevertheless, the Spyro series suffered from Bubsy syndrome, or more commonly referred to as sequelitis. See, too many Spyro games were being produced in too short of a time. The publisher went with quantity over quality, something that can immediately ruin a franchise. And in a day and age without patches and dozens of fanboys defending a broken mess, this was extremely detrimental for Spyro. And as the great Miyamoto once said, a delayed game, or one with more care and time, is eventually good, but a rushed game is forever bad. I feel that if the Spyro publishers had opted to put more time and care into their games, then maybe the backlash from fans would not have been so fierce. It could have even saved the series, but this is all speculation. Universal Interactive did the exact opposite and kept pumping Spyro games out, and well, it was ultimately worse for the series. Sure, it might have made them a quick buck, but was it worth it? Maybe. I don't know, I'm not an accountant. So, on to the Legend of Spyro. Like I said before, this was sort of a way to reboot the series to repair the damage done by the last two games. But once again, the games were met with backlash. Fans were still not happy with the Spyro games despite some decent reviews. There was something about the series that didn't satisfy that Spyro feel. Honestly, I didn't mind these games at all. The graphics were good and the games were still fun to play. I mean, at least it wasn't a glitchy mess like Enter the Dragonfly. Still, the games did not do as well as the company had hoped. The damage was already done from the other two Spyro games before. In other words, The Legend of Spyro had failed to revitalize the franchise, and just like that, an iconic video game character had met his end. As the saying goes, even the great must fall. Except Sonic. He's been run over by the back tires of a truck at least 3 times now, and he's still kicking somehow. So Spyro was dead. That is, until Activision sought to revive Spyro once again in 2011, just 3 years after the last Legend of Spyro game. Activision announced Skylanders Spyro's Adventure, and it prominently featured our favorite dragon. I remember during the game's initial reveal, Spyro was used as a marketing figure, mostly to cater to nostalgia and entice the younger audience the same way Spyro had enticed me as a kid. It's a brilliant strategy, and once the game was out, it was met with mostly positive acclaim. That should be a good thing, right? Well, it was for Skylanders, but not for Spyro. You see, right as the Skylanders series made millions upon millions of dollars, the suits at Activision realized they didn't need to use Spyro as a ploy to sell the game to people. The innovative elements were already doing that fine. So for the next game, Skylanders Giants, Spyro was not featured prominently in any promotional material. Hell, he wasn't even on the box art. It's blatantly obvious that Spyro was used as a marketing ploy, a brand that could get early adopters to jump on board the Skylanders IP. And when it worked and everyone was focusing on these revolutionary toys and not Spyro, it was finally over. A gaming giant was killed by advertising. Spyro has not been the main protagonist in any game since, and honestly, it's really disappointing to see Spyro go out this way. Activision used him like a toothbrush, not even hesitating to throw him away when they were done. But really, the end was inevitable, and Universal Interactive is as much to blame as Activision is. They pumped out game after game, opting for a quick buck rather than producing quality content that could live up to the originals. Enter the Dragonfly and A Hero's Tale had failed as both sequels and as games in general. Spyro just kept spiraling down, further and further into gaming hell where giants like Banjo-Kazooie and Crash Bandicoot currently dwell. This is something that happens to a lot of gaming giants. They're neglected and thrown aside by their owners and creators. But perhaps it's better this way. Perhaps Spyro's fate and many others' fates are a good thing. I'm not saying that keeping a beloved franchise dead is always great, but if a new Spyro game were to be released, would it ever live up to the originals? Almost every console Spyro game after the original trilogy was significantly worse, so maybe, just maybe, it's better to keep the good games close to your heart rather than getting wretched sequels that would tarnish its name more and more. Part of me really wants a new Spyro game, or for him just to be completely axed and not used in Skylanders like another forgettable character. See, Spyro really isn't dead yet. He's close to hell next to Crash and crew, but Activision is keeping him on life support, just barely, as a toy. As essentially a skin of another character. That is, in my opinion, a fate worse than death itself. So yeah, I'm really glad I could get that off my chest. I'm a long-time Spyro fan, and it's really a shame to see him get little to no attention nowadays. And keep in mind, if you're watching this in the future, perhaps things have changed and Spyro is getting a new game. And maybe that new game changed everything. Maybe it's the Spyro game I always hoped for as a teenager. But here in 2015, that doesn't look to be the case anytime soon. As always, feel free to drop a comment if you want to express your feelings about Spyro. Oh, and I almost forgot, I'm starting a Spyro retrospective pretty soon, so if you like Spyro, be sure to tune in next week when I review the first game of the Spyro trilogy. Okay, bye!